say you're interested, I'll send you either of those. Now, this is not an advert for these clearly, because I've just offered to give them away. But this one, I'm really, really thrilled with this. It's effectively Ellie Goldratt's book, The Goal, but I just looked in and I ignored the first half, and I then ignored the second half, and I just grabbed the most exciting bit from the very middle of it, which is about bottlenecks. And that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. That I'm hoping as you listen to this, you kind of have a little bit of an inkling that maybe this is just the beginning of what the theory of constraints has got going for and going for you. It's really, really, really powerful, and it kind of makes you cleverer than you are. At least it did for me. So now I'm just going to go and share my screen now. Okay. Now, if it seems weird at any stage, I am watching you all on a different monitor.
Yeah, right.
Hello. Is that okay?
Yep, that's the right one.
Cool. Okay, good. So we've got the slides up, and I'm just going to maximize this here. So one of the tricky things about doing the Mac is that when you use Keynote, it takes over all the screens and I can't see what's going on, hence two monitors. Okay, so the title of this is You've Limited WIP, which is, I guess, why you're all here. You've either doing that with Scrum or with Kanban, and you want to know what's next. And so I'm going to tell you that one option of what's next, and not the only option by any means, is to learn more about TOC, Theory of Constraints. Because what I've found with TOC is it's actually a very good way of scaling your influence. But part of the idea of theory of constraints is it's not all just about bottlenecks. It's about treating your business, the organization that you help or work for, as a complete unit, as one system rather than a bunch of silos. So it's treating your business not just as the business and as IT, as two silos, with each of which have silos within them, but managing it as a whole. The whole bottleneck thing is just kind of like the first starting point, because that's what limits your throughput, your profitability. So let me just draw a little picture here. Hopefully that's coming through. There we go. Now, the way I came to Agile via TOC. I discovered TOC in the 90s, and I was working in software development. And excuse me, I'm just going to stop my screen flashing there. And I hadn't, I learned TOC, I learned quality stuff, I learned lean, I learned all of that sort of stuff, but I just didn't know how to make it work in the environments where I was working, which was big software projects. And it wasn't until 2003 when I stumbled upon Agile that it all made sense. And the ideas from lean of picking, working with small batches, which is also part of theory constraints, and the idea from the quality movement of shipping, building quality in, by which we mean delivering potentially shippable code in software. They kind of collided, and I but not until I got Agile, and then that's when I went off and I started writing this book a few years later, which is about the combination of those three things: TOC plus lean plus quality, which happens to be the same as Agile, which limits WIP or Kanban, but with the bottleneck stuff thrown back in. So what I have found, and this is an option for you, is that if you're really loving the Agile Kanban world and you want to increase your influence or your helpfulness to take it further, then adding TOC to the stuff you already know is just it's just magic. So, right, you know about that book. You know about that book. Just may have seen that book there. That was a long time ago. And on here, if you happen to be very keen on TOC already, then this is a transcription of an audio book a transcription of a podcast interview I did with Ali Goldratt about 10 years ago, obviously before he died, but just shortly before he died. It's a really, really insightful interview. I did most of the listening and a tiny bit of the talking, but if you're interested, it's a good place to go and dive deep. You've seen 2 wine bottles. Now, I would like to roll you back to 1999, when I was skinnier and I had more hair, and we could fly places around the world. And I flew from New Zealand to Dublin. And while I was there, I was supposed to, of course, just be there for a year, but I ended up meeting my now wife of 20-something years, and I ended up hanging around for a while. While I was there, I got to practice neck management for the very first time. And I had, just before I left New Zealand, I had read The Goal, Ellie Goldratt's book, where it introduced bottlenecks, and I had started reading all around it, but I'd never faced a real life bottleneck. And actually, to be honest, I was kind of reading it because I like learning things, but then one day, an opportunity to actually use some learning snuck up on me. So 1999, this is in the time when people used to get checks sent out to pay bills and things. And I was working for a company that was a telecoms company in Ireland, and they were building a fiber optic network across the entire country. So they were investing a fortune in having a fiber optic network. And I was working as an Oracle Financials reporting specialist. Pretty boring job. I was writing reports in Access that were helping to implement an Oracle Financials implementation. It paid well, but it wasn't very interesting. Until one day, the head of the accounts department came over to me, and her name in fiction was Sinead, in the real life it was Sheila, and she came over, she called me up first thing one morning, and she said, look, I need to come over because I need a report, and I need it run really, 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 really quickly because, oh my God, I just need the report. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Can you just do it right now? And she turns up 5 minutes later looking really, really tired. And she said, where's my report? I said, I've set it off running, but it's going to take a while to run. You know, I can't speed up the computer anymore. She goes, oh, you wouldn't believe the day I'm having. And I said, oh, try me, tell me, have a seat. You got nowhere else to go. So she sat down and told me what was going wrong. And it was this. So the accounts department every month had to produce the accounts of, you know, what they've spent and what money's come in, but they also had to pay all of their suppliers for the services that rendered. And what would happen is that the suppliers would send an invoice, and then the team would process it, check it was all right, check there was a purchase order, approve it, and then send it off to a printer where they print off checks and they post them out, and everyone would be happy. But what had happened is that the accounts department couldn't keep up. Because they started doing this fiber optic network, there was a whole big flurry of many more invoices than they were used to, and they just couldn't keep up with the extra demand that was placed on them. And she said that what was happening, and the reason why this report was so urgent, is that their biggest contractor, the one who was doing most of the work on the fiber optic network, had just said that if they didn't get paid, then they would walk off. And they were building this company in order to sell it. And so this is really, really, really bad news, all the way from the CEO, all the way down. Everyone was very grumpy, and they really wanted this report because they were meeting with the contractors later. And there wasn't much I could do about it. I was just waiting for this report to run. And then a thought just sort of occurred to me. I thought, they can't keep up with the demand. I wonder if they have a bottleneck. And I said to Sheila, I said, do you guys have a bottleneck? Because keep in mind, I'd read the book, I had a lot of information in my head, but I hadn't actually applied it, and I really didn't know where to go next. And she said, oh, we've got hundreds of bottlenecks. And I thought to myself, that's interesting, because I think she's using the word bottleneck kind of like in everyday language just to mean a blocker and thing. But my understanding was that in the system there would only be one bottleneck. So I didn't really know what to say, and I just thought, could you describe your process? So she stuck up her hand, and she said, "Oh, yeah, it's really straightforward. We got 5 steps. You do this, this, and this. Okay, cool. And the first step is that the office junior goes to the mailroom first thing in the morning, gets the new invoices that come in. They do some accounting stuff. Then someone else does some accounting stuff. Then someone else does some accounting stuff. And then at the end, they push the button at the end of the day, and the printer gets all these checks, and they get printed out, and they send them off." We go, okay. All right. And I wasn't quite sure what to do next. And so I just said, "Oh, how many invoices can you do each day as you're currently working?" And she goes, "Oh, I don't know. No one's ever asked me that before. Let me think." And then she comes up with some numbers. And she's in the first step. We could probably do 90. In fact, I have a funny feeling this might have been per week, but that doesn't matter. Fiction and time make that not a problem. So she goes, 90, we could do 90. Okay, cool. The second step, let me think. Probably that many there. We got that and that and that and that. Okay, probably 40. Okay, cool. Good. And I'm writing these down on a whiteboard. She says this. And then she says in the next one, we could probably do 60. Now, keep in mind here as you're watching these numbers that the bottleneck will be the lowest one, because the work flows through the system and they're doing 90, 40, 60. And then she says for the next step, it'll probably be, I would imagine, about 20. Okay, right, cool. And I'm writing these things down going, well, that's interesting. And the very last step, I imagine we could do 10,000, 20,000 checks if we really wanted to. Because it's just a computer running and doing stuff. Okay, cool. So we put these things down and we look up at this, and I'm thinking, if I'm reading this right, they can only do 20 a day. And she looks at me and says, that's funny. We can only do 20 a day roughly. And that's the 4th step, isn't it? And I go, I said, and she says, yeah, okay, 20 a day. I do that step. You do that step. Yeah, I'm the only person that does that step. It's the approval step, and I'm the senior, and I approve stuff. So the whole system, it looks like the whole team has been limited by me. And I go, yeah, I think you're the bottleneck. She goes, oh. She goes, well, I know how to fix that. And she, within a few minutes, figures out that she hasn't been doing the approvals every day nearly as much as she, because she spent a lot of her time recruiting staff because a lot of them were leaving because it was such a stressful and unpleasant place. And she was spending a lot of time working, talking on the phone to angry suppliers. So which of course, both of those things were symptoms of this process, not keeping up with the demand placed upon it. So she goes, oh, okay, so I could get that up to 40 or 50 or 60 just by locking myself in an office with a laptop, every afternoon or every morning even. And she did that, and this whole problem, which had been there for months and months and months, and was causing the share price to be at risk, the CEO to be very, very, very grumpy, it disappeared within about 2 days. So that is there's someone, Silky, there's someone on, not on mute. Would you mind popping them?
Yeah, people, can you please all check if you're
somewhere.
all on mute maybe? There is some background noise at the moment. It's okay to be on video, but maybe at the moment mute would be good. I can't see anybody there is Felix who is not on mute.
Yep, you should be able to mute, I think. There we go. But it's okay. It's just distracting, and I'm just listening out for the sound of a toilet flushing. To be honest.
That's a bottleneck too,
Okay.
isn't it?
Yes. So we have a bottleneck. So this one here was my first real life bottleneck, and we found it in about 10 minutes. And this bottleneck, which had been causing problems for months and months and months, just oh, hang on, there we go. It just disappeared. So the bottleneck went away. There was no bottleneck after this. Everyone got paid. All the stress went away. The manager didn't have to recruit any more staff. The CEO managed to sell the company for a huge amount of money a few months later, and no one even knew that I had had this conversation and saved the company from imminent ruin. I'm kind of exaggerating a bit then, but I wish at the time I'd made more of a fuss about it, because all of the permanent staff that were there got huge bonuses and I got nothing for helping them out. But that's beside the point. Right, now roll forward to Edinburgh in 2016. So in all this time, I've gone through and I took that initial burst of learning that bottleneck management was just actually really surprisingly easy, so long as you knew bottleneck, and solving the bottleneck situation was often just as easy as finding it, often easier. And I had started applying it in software development. And I want to tell you a little example here. This is a small example, but I just kind of like this example. I think it's easy to tell, and it has some whiteboards in it, and that makes people happy. So this team was a team of 16 people, gnarly old developers and testers, and some of the code they were working on was as old as the oldest people in the team, and they were in their 50s. It would have, right early day stuff, some really messy things, and these people were some of the best developers this organization had, and they were stuck fixing really ugly defects. So they had 120 defects on their list, which weren't really very important, apart from the fact that they got reported to a government body, which then collated them because they broke regulations. And so they had to get rid of them so that they could focus on other things. And the CEO and the board got a report of these from internal audit every month. So they were really important, but they weren't really very valuable to get rid of. So they just wanted to get rid of them as fast as they could. The CIO asked me to go have a look at them. And he said, hey, look, at the moment, they are doing roughly 10 a month. They're doing 10 a month. So you've got 16 people and they're managing to fix 10 defects. So these are pretty ugly, gnarly things. And you've got 10 a month, and I've promised that they'll have them done by the end of the year, except that their current rate is going to be several months after that. And I've worked it out, save you the bother. We need to get them up to 13 a month to get rid of this backlog of these horrible, icky, pointless defects. You go, okay, that sounds all right. And he says, but look, I warn you, I'm not expecting very much from you. I just want you to pop your Agile hat on, boomf, go along, have a look at them, and just see if there's anything that you can come up with. Who knows? Just fresh eyes might see something. And because I'm telling you this story, you can tell it ends happily. But anyway, here's what happened. He also said to me, oh, look, I've got to tell you though, look, you probably won't come up with anything, but it doesn't matter if you don't, because I've got other projects going on, and some should be finishing around October. And if we need to, I'll get 6 of the best developers off those projects, and I will chuck them at this stuff, and we'll sort it out there. So just do your best. Okay. All right. I go along and have a look, and I talk to Eve, whose real name was Elaine. I talked to Eve, and she runs through stuff, and she says, look, everyone's really, 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 really busy. They're really busy doing their work. So don't bother anyone, okay? Yeah, all right, okay. And she says, and look, we've spent months trying to do this. We run a fairly tight ship. I would say that almost everyone actually works longer hours than they're meant to. So by all means, have a little poke around, but don't bug anyone. All right, okay. And I wasn't quite sure what to do, so I said, look, if you could like a printout of where all of these things are, and I could just see because you know you want to visualize stuff. And she says, well, look, turn around. And so I spun around in the chair, and behind me there were these whiteboards there already, and I hadn't seen them because I walked in past them and I hadn't seen them. And so we popped up and we walked over and we had a look at them. And now I haven't written any code for probably 20 years, but I looked at that and I had a fairly good idea that something was missing. There was a whiteboard missing, unless the programmers did all of their own testing. And I said to her, do you guys, how do you do your testing? And she sort of laughed and she said, there's another whiteboard around the corner. We used to just have these three here, but then we ended up with so many, so many stickies, you know, on the testing whiteboard, that there wasn't enough space, and we couldn't put it in the walkway. So we popped it around the corner, and the two testers, they just have they have all their own stand-ups and stuff, you know, separately from everyone else. It's actually quite cool. It's quite good. It's, you know, it's good to be able to see everything, isn't it? And I'm looking at it, and I'm sure you've spotted the bottleneck already. You know, it's kind of, it sort of jumps out at you. Now the thing, if you didn't spot it automatically, the way you find a bottleneck normally, if you can see what's going on, is you look for the cues of stuff. So when you looked closely at this, it was clear that this stuff in the circle here these were bugs that had been fixed according to the programs, but they hadn't been tested yet. And it was clear that the people upstream of the testing were able to stick stickies on the board much faster than the testers could fix them. So testing was a bottleneck. But now there's a problem. There's a problem that if you come in and people have been working like this and there's been a board sitting in front of them shouting out something that's really obvious and they hadn't seen it, and they feel a little bit sort of silly. So I spent a bit of time with the team over the next week, and I just chatted through, and I didn't mention bottlenecks or anything. I just tried to verify that there wasn't something, you know, that I didn't understand, but there wasn't. So we got everyone together, and then we kind of ran through. Eve ran through, and she'd come up with some rough numbers, much like Sheila in the Irish accounting team, and she figured out roughly that these are the numbers that could be done by each role, and they weren't accurate, but they were accurate enough. And she sort of talked through this with the team, and then I gave them a little talk about bottlenecks, and their eyes all glazed over because I'm the only person in the world, I think, that finds bottlenecks absolutely, utterly fascinating. And I noticed eventually that their eyes were glazing over. So I said to them, have I told you about the buffalo? And people who've worked with me long enough learn that if I asked them that, to say yes, of course, but these guys hadn't. So I got to tell them the little buffalo joke. This is a little joke, and it explains two things. One is that we need to limit WIP. And the other is that we need to find our bottleneck manager. And it's quite funny. Just in case you missed the bit that's funny, I will point it out. Just in case. So this... I'll just get rid of that. I don't know if you could hear that, but that's the theme music from Cheers. This story went around in the early 2000s as an email, and it told this joke, and they said it came from Cheers, the TV show, but actually it didn't, but it sort of seems like it could have. If there's anyone young here, email is what we used to use to send jokes around before Facebook and then TikTok, etc. So the joke starts out like this. It comes from Cliff Clavin, who's a very odd postal worker. He says to his friend Norm, well, you see, Norm, it's like this. A herd of buffalo can only move as fast as the slowest buffalo. See, there they go. I hope you can see that animating well, because that took me months to get that. Right. And then the slowest buffalo stays at the back of the herd, and the faster buffalo run at the front, but at slower speed. Otherwise, the herd would split apart. Now, if you, since this is limited WIP meeting, the idea of keeping the herd together is analogous to having low WIP. But when they split apart, they have high WIP, like this. And when they're split apart, the buffalo become prone to attack by wolves. But naturally, when they attack, they can attack from all angles, and they can take away the strongest buffalo. So evolution actually favored the herds that didn't spread apart. And they were actually very hard to attack when they were running as one unit, except for one point. When these tightly packed herds were hunted, the wolves killed the slowest and the weakest buffalo. And where were they? They were the ones at the back. And that made the remaining herd stronger and faster. Whew. Hope you enjoyed my sound effects there. Right. So here's the joke bit. And Cliff says, and in much the same way, the human brain can only operate as fast as the slowest brain cells. That might or might not be good science. Now, as we know, excessive intake of alcohol kills brain cells, but naturally it attacks slowest and the weakest brain cells first. This is really kind of just common sense. And in this way, regular consumption of beer eliminates the weaker brain cells, making the brain a faster and more efficient machine. And in that way, that norm is why you always feel smarter after a few beers. Okay, now I hope you're all giggling away there. I can't see your, you've all turned your webcams off, so I can't see you laughing. But when I told this joke, and when I've told it, people have a bit of a laugh. And they usually point at the bigger drinkers in the group, and they all sort of, have a little bit of a giggle. And then they turn back to me and they're sort of going, why did I tell them this? Now, for you all, I think you can see there quite clearly that by analogy, keeping the herd running as a tightly packed herd is limited WIP, which is good. But then the herd runs at the speed of the slowest buffalo, which is bottleneck. So when I tell people this, what I find is that for some reason, when they laugh, they get quite open-minded and creative. And so suddenly you had a team that was really quite engaged. And so I said to them, well, where's your slowest buffalo? And they all turn and look at their two testers, because it was kind of really quite obvious. They all knew it. And the testers kind of laugh a bit. And then I say to them, well, how could we speed you guys up? And they chatted without me really doing anything apart from just asking them, prompting them with the questions that I'm telling you here. They chatted and they realized that it's probably only the testers were already very, very, very efficient. And the only way that they could see to speed them up was to get them to stop going to one meeting that happened with the entire test team in the organization once a month. And that was the only bit of fat that they could find that they thought they could trim. Which sort of was a little bit disappointing, because I thought, oh, well, it'd be nice. Usually you find that it's easier, like the Irish accountants, it was just so much easier to fix. This one involved a good half hour more thinking than that one did. But generally, when you're looking at this, you're just looking directly at the bottleneck, figuring out what could they do, and it's often things like time management and stuff like that. So I then asked them, well, is there any way that you faster buffalo can help? And they were everyone was a little bit quiet. And they weren't really forthcoming with anything. So I sort of suggested, well, in some places when I found this situation, because it's quite often that testers, are the bottleneck. Quite often, and I'm speaking very tentatively, quite often, you can get other people in the team to help out with the testing, manual testing. And the test lead said, nope, we're not doing that. I go, oh, because I was quite surprised by that, because that, quite a lot of places are quite happy to do that. And they said, we've tried that. And across the organization, we do not let programmers do testing because they're not very good at it and they just get grumpy and they just create more work. So it's actually banned. We're not allowed to do that. I go, oh, okay. Interesting. Because that was what I thought we'd end up doing. I thought it was just fairly obvious that we're doing it. And then the conversation carried on for a while. Everyone was kind of a little bit cautious. And eventually, one of the testers said, there is something that you guys, you developers in particular, you could do. You know how when we come to you and we say, the test environment's dead and it's not working, we can't do any work, and you say, oh cool, yeah, I'll look at that this afternoon, and we have to wait. Just given that you guys, is there any way you guys could just jump and just fix that stuff really just quickly, so we don't have to wait? And the developers go, yeah, and they talk a wee bit, and then they eventually just agreed, why doesn't the development team just take it on as one of their most important jobs, is not to just fix things in the code, but to keep the test environment running nice and smooth, and that way the testers will have less downtime. And the other thing that they came up with was quite surprising, how these things are, that little clever ideas are so obvious in retrospect. But the tester said, well, there's another thing that you could help us with, which is you guys not allowed to actually test, but I suppose you could key in test data, because that takes us a lot of time. And the programmers said, well, why are you keying in your test data? We run programs that set up our test data. Why do you do it manually? And the answer was, well, no one had told the testers that they could use the programs to set up the test data. So they did that. And I'm just going to skip through that stuff there. Well, I'll come back to that in a moment. And they ended up speeding up very, very quickly. They've just put these two things in. They add a little bit of extra coordination where they got the whole team standing around their boards for the stand-up, and making sure that they got the testing team, they prioritized any blockers so that the testing team would be more efficient. Right, now, if you've sent me a link already on LinkedIn, so a message or an invite on LinkedIn, I'll send you a copy of this book, and the story is actually more elaborated in there, and as well as the find, optimize, coordinate, collaborate, curate, upgrade, and start again strategically steps at the bottom here. But that's called the focus formula. See how it cleverly spells out focus? That's called a backronym. And you start with the word you want, and then 3 days later you come up with the words that are down the bottom. So that's the focus formula, and it's a mnemonic it's quite easy to remember. And this book has got a lot more detail on it. I'm really happy to send you a copy of that if you're interested. Right. Whoops. Right. So they went off and they did this stuff, and they got some really good results, which I'll tell you about in just one moment. But now, just as a thought experiment for all of you, do you remember at the beginning of the story, the CIO said, look, I'll get you 6 crack developers for 3 months starting in October. Can you think what would have happened? In fact, could we had someone? Can I go to? I'm just trying to think here. I'm wondering if I can go to gallery view. No, I can't go to gallery view. No, apologies. I'd just love to know. I can have a look here. Yeah, I can actually scroll through you guys. So these developers, who thinks, just the thumbs up. I'm going to give you a few options here. If we'd added those developers, would they have gone faster? The team? No. Excellent. I like that, Greg. Excellent. Thumbs down. And thank you, Dave or Guy. Excellent. Okay, we're looking good there. Yeah. So adding those developers wouldn't have gone faster. No. Do you think they would have gone maybe slower? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Yeah, lovely. The funny thing about this is that almost all the time when people want to go faster, they think they need to add more developers. But adding more developers doesn't go faster unless they are the bottleneck, and you can add them in a way that does actually make them productive quickly, not slow everyone down. So the original plan here would have actually made things quite a lot worse. It would have bumped this lady's budget up quite a chunk. It would have slowed down several projects that couldn't start because they needed those developers starting on them. And it would have actually slowed down this effort. So I hope that's just a little surprise there, because when I first heard the CIO say that, I, CN, I thought that's a good idea. But it was only when we got in and we realized actually that the testers were the bottleneck that it was actually not a good idea at all. So, but that's a pattern you see often. Now, so this is Elaine in real life, even the book. I met up with her probably 3 or 4 months later. We actually became quite good friends because of this. And she said, "Oh, wow, you wouldn't believe it. We've put all of the things in you suggested, and just there, I didn't suggest them. She, her team came up with they come up with every solution except for maybe getting the whole team standing around all of the whiteboards rather than having the testers have theirs separately. All I did was help them see the bottleneck and then guide them through the focus formula I showed you. They did all of the thinking. I just had the process." And she said, "We've never worked so few hours. We've never completed so much work," because she said they had actually cut down the number of hours they were all working. Everyone stopped working overtime. And they increased their throughput by at least 30%. And in fact, they blitzed their goal. And as she summed it up, they had calmed down and sped up at the same time. And the reason for that is it is around the bottleneck, but it's because they started working as one team. And if you, as a bunch of people interested in limiting WIP, the moment that they had this conversation, the WIP started to decrease because bottlenecks and WIP, just like the running buffalo, work together. Okay, now I'm going to ask some questions in just a moment, but I just want to point out something that that I should have put in here as kind of like just a summary at this point, which is that when you do Scrum or when you do Kanban, you limit WIP. In fact, you do two things. You limit WIP by working in smaller batches, and you build quality in by shipping potentially shippable working software. So those are the two things. You've got something come from lean, small batches, and the quality stuff, and you combine them together and you get nice incremental software development. And that's brilliant. You all know the benefits of WIP. In the theory of constraints, we do that, but we also add in the bottleneck stuff. And after we've had the questions, I'll tell you why it's important you do that. But I just want to just emphasize here that all of the stuff that you've learned from Scrum and Kanban, it all works. It's just that when you add the bottleneck stuff and a whole lot of other stuff from theory of constraints later if you want to, it just makes everything run faster and it calms things down. And you will increase your productivity, but you might end up with the funny situation where people are less busy. Okay, so Kanban good, Agile good, Scrum good, but TOC is like sort of strapping on a little turbocharger. Right, okay. Back to you, Silky. Any in the studio? Any questions?
Yeah, there was actually one from Tatis. In the goal, the bottleneck was identified by the amount of inventory piled up before it. However, here it looks like the bottleneck is where the inventory has piled up.
That's just purely for the sake of speed. See the circle on here. If I drew, I don't know if I can do this. I can maybe annotate here. Draw. If I drew a circle around there and said that's waiting to be shipped, and this stuff is, sorry, this one here is being tested at the moment, and this stuff here actually has been tested and it's passed and it's ready to be shipped, then this is like the big pile of work that's sitting in front of the machine. The testers were working on this lot and they'd already finished with that lot. So hopefully that clarifies it. Depending where you are in the world, I'm sure you can think of your traffic system and find one spot where a great big tailback of cars first thing in the morning and maybe a different spot in the afternoon. Everywhere I've lived has had a couple of places, and if you want them to figure out where the bottleneck is, you just mention that. And the pile of stickies is analogous to a bunch of cars waiting to be picked up. Sorry, waiting to get through the bottleneck.
There is Ange asking, where is their done list?
Where is the what? Sorry,
where is their done list?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
I think, as she probably said, when's the work actually done? It doesn't seem to have to be done after the testing.
Oh, the done list. Sorry, I thought you were asking me where the Adonis was, which I thought was a well-structured, muscly man, which I different slide deck. Where's the done list? Okay, so I have just cut this down for simplicity. The done list is actually effectively that stuff there that's actually done. You could, if you want to, add other columns in here, but so this one here, we could have just put a line between that and called that waiting to be tested on this side. And Darren, I'm not allowed to kill the testers. I've just seen. The funny thing about telling that joke is that when you tell that joke, people kind of laugh and they almost always suggest that. And I've been telling that particular joke hundreds of times in the last, I'm not sure, 15 years or so, maybe longer. And only once has someone suggested feeding beer to the testers because it makes them smarter. So there. Sorry, Silky.
Yeah, no, that's so. I think the bottom line of this meetup is give beer to the testers, isn't it?
Yep. I don't think testers would ever complain.
Yeah. Hang on, there is Andreas. Have they limited work after they found out any systematic changes apart from beer?
So yeah, those were just the initial ones that they did, the two that I've mentioned. In fact, to be honest, and this is a pattern over and over, I provide two things to the team when I talk people through this. One is the concepts of effectively limiting WIP and the bottleneck, and then I supply a little bit of guidance, a few sort of guide rails to take them through the focus formula that's at the bottom of the screen. But they provide all of the input and they just kick it off. And so I suggested really nothing there. And they suggested all the stuff and they implemented it. And then because they were meeting each day to manage their board together, they actually just kept improving. Which is really good. On my last day in that company, I kind of left at short notice to move back here because my mum was sick, and I left between Christmas and New Year, and I wanted in the office to drop off some stuff. And as I was leaving, I bumped into the lead analyst in that team, and he said, "Oh, see you. We must catch up sometime." I hadn't seen him for 18 months, and he said to me something that kind of annoyed me a little bit, but also delighted me. He said, "Hey, you know that system that you set up for us? We've been using that ever since, and it just works wonderfully, and it's just absolutely brilliant. So thank you." And yet, the funny thing is that they did all of the creative work. I just gave them this, this view of there being a bottle, them having a bottle, and the bottle having a neck, and they did all of the magic there. And that's a pattern that you find over and over and over again. That said, once you do it, there are quite a few things that can make a nice system like this just crumble away and disappear. And so you actually have to protect the bottleneck management. I think I may have just answered a more interesting question in my head than you asked me, Silky, by the way.
What? There is Tatius again now. I'm actually wondering if we should open it up and give people a chance to actually talk. I think because
that's good. I'll stop sharing as well.
It should still be organized, and I quite like the interaction as well. So Tatius,
what a good-looking bunch.
Yeah.
Except for you, Greg. Sorry.
Tatius, do you want to just explain your questions in person?
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So my question basically, I'm following a lot of the DevOps space, and there's this constant focus on builds, number of builds we are pushing out per day, that kind of stuff. And it seems to me that we focus our entire effort on this, whereas the bottleneck to me is usually somewhere upstream, usually in requirements or in the analysis design, and that's where a lot of stuff gets stuck. So what are your thoughts on this push towards having more automation, building things faster, building things more?
Right. That's actually what I'm going to talk about next, and the second part, the secret bit, not the secret bit, the secret sauce. And if I were to answer your question now, and I can just run through it in a bit more detail in a moment, it's a big problem that we, hang on, if I roll back a few years, the emphasis was automate on everything, because if you think about the bottlenecks, they're not a resource, they're a type of resource, so testing resource. So it's kind of obvious to all of us that if you want to get more testing, it's great if you could automate the testing. So for a long time, people would just automate blindly testing, thinking it was good for productivity. And it was, when testing was the bottleneck, which it is in a lot of places. But then it just become a habit, and people kept doing it. I think the same things happen with DevOps. And I love all of the DevOps stuff. It's just as agile as anything ever has been. But we do tend to get misled by two things. One is that automating everything is good, but as a technical community, you can understand why. That's what we do. We've got a hammer, so we go looking for nails and automate stuff. And the other bit is, sorry, it's just skipped out of my mind. I had a perfectly formed compound sentence there. Hang on, where were we? DevOps, we're automating stuff. Really? All the time. Now, that is something that we can do. But likewise, I can hit my self on the hand with a hammer if I want to, as many times as I like. Just because I can do something doesn't mean that I should. Just because I can automate testing doesn't mean that I should. You have to manage the system as a whole. And quite often, as good as it is that we can release often, releasing less frequently is often better. And so quite often the stuff that's happening in ops to release more often is actually, we're kind of chasing the wrong goal. It's not a bad thing to do, except it often just gets people focusing on releasing all the time, when batching up stuff can sometimes be better.
It makes sense to actually talk to the customer and have some coordination, like consideration about coordination cost.
So the coordination cost, it's I haven't heard that term for a long time. I teach at the business school in Wellington, and luckily I do the teaching, not the admin side of it. And talking to the professor that I work with, she, by the way, she's one of the world's best theory constraints people around, and she said that the company that produces the software that the students use to submit all of their assignments, and then the tutors and the lecturers used to mark it and to grade and collate reports, they didn't used to release very often. And then they started releasing all the time, and everything changed. And some things got better and some things got worse, and everything got confusing. And so the frequency of releasing actually just overwhelmed people, and it cost them so much time. And yet I imagine there were some really well-intended computer people who were busy going, this is great, look how often we can release. And they didn't realize the pain they were causing.
So there were actually a few other questions. There was
Graz, sorry, in the background. I just got to wave to Graz. You've got a beautiful assistant there.
And thanks
so much shy there.
Yeah,
sorry.
It was really nice to see you all the time, Graz, on your video. It makes it more personal. Do you want to ask your question in person, or should I just read it out? You are on mute.
Who's that for?
Graz. I think she's talking to us, but she's on mute.
Oh, you did actually have a question. Sorry.
Yeah, I did. But if we have got limited time, there is a really good question from Bogdan. So maybe go to that one first, because I think it's probably more interesting than mine.
Right. Bogdan.
I can actually see your question if you like. I can answer that one there and read it out for you. Sorry, I didn't realize you put a question up. I just noticed that you got a lot younger.
I can read it.
If I read that out. Do you want me to read that out, Silky, and then we'll come back to Bob?
Like, as you like, okay. I can do it, or you.
So you said, mention protecting the bottleneck management just before. Can you please say a few more words about it? Yeah, okay. So this is where, if you look at the theory of constraints, it's not just about bottlenecks. In fact, you look at the goal, which was the original book written in the 70s, when Goldratt come up with this stuff. It's sort of a good bit of it's still current, but a lot of it's actually been superseded and is a bit out of date now. But the first half of that book focuses on measurements, and bottlenecks aren't mentioned until the midpoint. And in fact, that's how you know, this book here is a novel, and that's what you do in business novels and in other novels. Right in the middle of the book, you have the big, where's it gone? Light bulb moment. You think I'd planned this? I haven't. Where you give them this big idea, and then the whole direction of the story changes. You'll find that in all sorts of books, and that's what it was like in the goal. But the reason they had that is that the bottleneck stuff is really, really obvious. You know, once you see it, you walk around and you'll see bottlenecks. You just didn't know about them if you're not already managing them. But it's when you the knowing about the logistics side of it isn't enough. The measurement systems, and I've had this happen to me a few times when I was younger and more enthusiastic, more naive. You would fix things, get them running, and then measurement systems would change, or And often that was just people trying to come in, say a new manager, they would come in and they would go, oh, this silly bottleneck stuff. It's made everything quite quiet. A lot of these people aren't busy all the time. I've got to get them busy. And so that's one of the drivers, is that it is keeping people busy all the time. And a lot of people who don't understand this stuff will just, they'll just put that in. And I've seen that happen a few times. I had one project of 100 people where I went through and I got them to, with the bottleneck in the absolute perfect place. Actually, it was 100 IT people, so it was a big project, bottleneck exactly where we want it, which is what I'll mention just in the next section. And then the new manager on the business side came in. The team said to him, oh, hey, look, we need more of your time. A verbal fight sort of took off. Everyone got really, really grumpy with each other. And then the manager insisted that the entire IT team start recording their hours and justifying the utilization, which meant that everyone then had to be really, really busy. Otherwise, they got beaten up. And all of the good work that we'd put in disappeared. And I didn't really even notice it happening until it was too late. And so measurements, and that's one of the things that's good about theory constraints, is that it actually looks at the measurements, not just the logistics. And in fact, you can do a lot to improve things just by looking at the measurements.
Mm. The thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, there is always a bottleneck somewhere.
Yeah. So actually, that's a really interesting point, because there's always a bottleneck somewhere, but it might not be where you think it is. So, yeah. For instance, actually, just forget about the current stuff that's going on that we won't mention. But Wellington Airport is a really interesting example. It looks like there's a bottleneck because remember how you look for a queue of waiting things, especially like you want to get people thinking about traffic systems where the queue is. Outside Wellington Airport, there's a big queue of taxis waiting for people. Big queue of taxis waiting for people. And that's actually like having a factory that's got no work. So it doesn't actually have a bottleneck in the delivery part. The bottleneck is in the part of the taxi business that has allowed Uber to take over and take much of their business away. And so they have, if you looked at just as a normal business, they have two sort of standard bits. One is get work. The other bit is do the work. And normally when we think about bottlenecks, we think of the do the work as where the bottleneck will be. But if you don't have enough work to do, then your bottleneck is actually the get work bit of it. So to put that in everyday language, it's if you're not selling enough, then your bottleneck's in sales. And in fact, inside bottleneck, I don't have an example here. They talk about sales funnel and sales. If you look at each of the steps, there will be a bottleneck step in every sales system. So the bottleneck stuff applies there. That for me was a revelation when a while ago I switched to doing remote work. And I realized that for me, switching business so that I didn't have to travel, inside my head, there's one entire business, and it wasn't the do work bit that was the bottleneck, it was the get work bit. So I had to start, promoting stuff and inventing products, and I had to invent a whole marketing and sales kind of stuff in my own head and actually work on that, because there was no point me, there was nothing to deliver. I had to focus on that. And a lot of businesses at the moment are exactly like that. You'll find that at the moment there's so many people where the demand has shrunk that the bottleneck is now not where it might have been inside their operations, but in their in the parts of the organization that figure out how to get work. So I've always got a long answer for a short question. So yeah. Ask me a longer question.
I know. But mindful of time, 15 minutes left. I don't mind if we go a bit over time. But there was actually book done. But keeping in mind that we do want to listen to your to that special part in the end. So maybe quickly, do you have a recommendation on introducing the concept of TOC bottlenecks on organization level or above teams level?
Yep. Seriously, in the old days, I used to try to get people to read the goal, but no one will read that anymore because it's 400 pages, it's 40 years old, and people just don't read stuff like that anymore. So that's why I wrote the Bottleneck rules. If anyone wants to introduce it, you've got a free copy. Just LinkedIIn me, and then just give it to someone. Send it to someone. I'm doing a thing tomorrow night with the US Air Force and the maintenance aircraft maintenance division of the US Air Force, and they're putting in TOC. So they're using my book to train people. So I'm trying to give it away and promote it at the same time. This is I just tried enormously to simplify the bottleneck stuff so that most people could get it, and this is just an hour and a half, and of course it gives you it's actually a lot simpler than what you'll find in the goal. It gives you a bit more information. I'd love it if you went on and read the goal afterwards, but just start with this. Just read it, send it on, tell someone the joke, the buffalo joke. Yeah, that's how I do it. There are colonels in the US Air Force and a major in a different department who we're chatting with, and yeah, it's just such a simple idea once you get it.
And it's great practical examples from real life. It's a really good book.
Can I do a follow-up on this one, please? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a follow-up on this one. So I understand, let's say from a theoretical point of view, I know where I can start introducing the bottleneck or the theory of constraints. That's easy. I think what my question was more about, how do we identify bottlenecks in value delivery that require, you know, a chain of teams delivering stuff or delivering value, right? So you have customer value rarely is being delivered by one team independently, right? In most cases, it's a collaboration or a chain of events that lead to customer value. So how do you identify the bottleneck in a chain of teams, let's say, and how do you try to solve that issue?
Okay. So the bottleneck rules does have steps to do that, and I'll see if I can just summarize them really quickly. There's a few things you can do, but you've already seen some examples of it. But the first step is make work visible. And just find out where the work is, and don't do a value stream map because you could spend 3 or 4 months doing a value stream map because you're not trying to document it. You're just trying to find where is the narrowest point in the flow. List out the resources. You probably only need 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 at the most bubbles on the diagram, and just try and find and find where things are built up, like you saw in that white board with the circle. Go around and ask people. Everyone on the ground that's been working there and has seen more than just their local little silo knows where the bottleneck is. If you've only got people who know where the silo is, just wander around and just ask what's holding them up. You'll find a consistent view. If you're really lazy and it's a software development one, it's probably, depending on your life cycle, it's probably testing as you bottleneck, unless you've been doing Agile for a while and you've sorted that out already. For years, I could just walk in and I just didn't need to look. You just knew it was going to be testing. But nowadays, and this is kind of what I'm going to talk about a little bit in the next section, is that the bottleneck in IT is not DevOps. If you've read the Phoenix Project, it's not DevOps. DevOps is like if you imagine a big factory and the ship only leaves every few months, compared to buying a bunch of cars that can leave more often. That the bottleneck in terms of the amount of stuff that's delivered is is earlier, is upstream from that. That doesn't mean that speeding up and doing the DevOps stuff and operations isn't important, because that's the frequency that we actually ship. And the frequency that we ship has that if we delay it, it delays the flow of value. So it's two different issues there that the authors kind of conflated, but it did a wonderful thing because it got people interested in TOC. If you're working in software development, commercial or otherwise large scale, these days the bottleneck is almost always the customer. You might not think of the customer as being the bottleneck, but just imagine a bunch of buffalo running along as a herd, and the chap who's at the back of the herd, the slowest buffalo, is the one that's supposed to be leading the herd, but doesn't have enough time to come to meetings or to provide good quality staff. But the herd keeps on running on anyway, as fast as they can, and get separated from them. Then they're actually the bottleneck. It's like, I wish I had a funnel here. I have a prop funnel that I've lost. A funnel like this. Normally you would think of the stuff coming through, the bottlenecks at the bottom. Flip that up and just imagine that your IT team is got the narrow end of it that's feeding it is right at the top, and that's where the bottleneck almost always is. But we use different terms. We don't talk about capacity. We say our customer's too busy. That's capacity. Our customer's not engaged. Oh, why is that? They're too busy. They don't give us enough time. They're too busy. So that's where you start. How about if I'll just talk through what I was going to talk through next, because it just leads on onto this. And then
I was actually thinking the same, because I think it's a real good handover to your to the final part. Would you mind if I say something about the scaling
go for it.
question from a Kanban point of view? Because
Go for it.
Yeah, because in Kanban we scale three-dimensional, kind of like widths, breadths, and heights, and that's where your book comes into play in the material, and it's really nice because I think the way you kind of scale and go organizational wide would be the third step in GoldRed, which is subordinate. And in your book, I think you call it coordinate, collaborate, and curate. So you first look at the bottleneck, like at the inside, and then you actually look at external factors as well. And I think that's that scaling part where you look at why is that bottleneck there? Is there something we can do in the team, or is there something we need to negotiate outside of the team? And that's where you go organizational wide, I guess.
Yep. And what you find is that if you've got lots of teams, you may effectively have what's like two bottles where they don't really interact that much, but look for the shared resource. Because you'll find that probably 60 to 70% of the teams will all be held up by the same shared resource. And then you can just think your way out of that. And that's where the curate step is. I'm so proud of my focus formula, because I think the curate step is, it's just magic. It's just imagine that you have a museum. You know, we've all got museums. They have limited public space. They have tons of stuff they could put out there. So they have a curator who very carefully looks and goes, well, what do we put in our most precious space? And that's what at the scaling level that we're supposed to do. You know, that's what all of the scaling frameworks that I think they try and do it, but they don't do it around the bottleneck. That's one thing that the DevOps, the Phoenix project did well. It reduced the multitasking and the number of active projects, and it paced them at DevOps, which is effectively curating the work that goes through the system. It did miss all the stuff that went on between, which I think is where the real bottleneck is, but that's my humble opinion.
Cool. So
how about I should pop into this and just wrap this up? Good. Okay, now I'm going to do the share screen thing again because I'm very good at computers. All right. Can you see that? Gosh, I've been using this picture for a long time.
View again.
There we go. Okay. Yeah.
The presentator view again.
What was that? Sorry.
You've got the presentator.
Yep. I'm trying to find the thing here.
Okay.
Right. There we go. Cool. Okay. So it should be popping up now. So this is the magic, and it's called U-shaped team. Now, I don't talk about it in this. You won't read about it in Rolling Rocks Downhill. You won't read about it in the Phoenix Project, and you won't read it in the Goal. But I hope when you see it, you'll spend 2 or 3 years like I did going, that's so obvious it can't be true. But I've come to the point where it is true. What you will read in here is about different types of bottleneck. And there's a life cycle for bottlenecks. They start off untamed. No one can see them, right? It's because you can't see bottlenecks. No one teaches you how. But then when you learn how to see them, you go, oh, there's a bottleneck. And it's running wild and it's causing all sorts of hassle and stress and rework and, oh my God, and suppliers aren't, they're walking off fiber optic things and you're having to employ people and oh my God, and the government's got all these lists of things. And then you see the bottleneck and you take it from being untamed or wild and you tame it. So you get some control over it. And one of the ways to do that is you put a deliberate bottleneck at the start of your system. So you effectively choke the starting of work or you limit WIP. So that's how we manage. That's a first step in managing bottlenecks, is you choke the amount of work that's coming into it. And that often reveals the true place of the bottleneck, even if you can't find it. All right. The other sort is that strategic bottleneck. And I'll show you one at the moment. And this is where this comes in. A strategic bottleneck is in the right place. And it's also working on the right stuff. And I'm just going to tell you about the right place stuff, because this is so important. Because almost everywhere, even if they know they've got a bottleneck, it's in the wrong place. Here we go. So a while ago, I met this development manager. I've just wrapped it up in a story. It makes it easier to tell for me. And I met him, it was I had breakfast with him in Wellington. And he said, oh, he'd read the book. Tell me a bit about these bottlenecks then. And so I ran through and just gave him the very short version of this. And then I said, oh, there's something special you should know, which is that the bottlenecks should be in one particular place in software development teams. He said, oh, okay, where's that? I said, well, let me tell you about, by analogy. And so there's a friend of mine, Graham Scott, who does TOC and accounting and budgeting and stuff like that. Really clever guy. But he told me about some work he did with a surgery. It was like a small private surgery. The surgeon also worked in the local hospital, but he had a private practice as well. And he asked for some help. And so they went along, looked at this, and they had a few people there, but this guy did the work. He was a surgeon. He cut the patients up. He was the one with the knife. Everyone else was there to support him. He had nurses, PAs, receptionists, probably web designers, all sorts of other people doing things there, but he did the work. All right. Now, my friend Graham goes in to visit him and he says, oh, okay, right, you look like you're all busy here, which is always a warning sign, because if everyone's busy, that usually means that the bottleneck isn't being managed. And he goes, yeah, we are busy. You go, all right, and they look at, and he goes, all right, well, you're the one that does the work. That when you finish doing some work and it's all wrapped up, the cash register rings. Cha-ching. Yep. Okay, so the cash right? Okay. Did you ever get delayed by anything? And he goes, yeah, quite often actually. So like quite often, like one thing that happens where I get delayed is, we have to sterilize our equipment, and we have this sterilizing thing over there. And when the stuff goes into the sterilizer, sometimes it's not ready, after operations, and I might have to wait a little while for it. So I do get delayed there. Oh, okay, cool. Right. What else delays you? Quite often, I might be waiting at the start, for a nurse, or often at the end of an operation, for nurse. So sometimes I just won't have enough, nurses there. So I get to labour that. And the guy goes, okay, how much do you charge per patient? And I don't know what the number was, but it had quite a lot of zeros on it. Okay, right. Okay, so each day you might do 2-3 hours worth of operating, and you make, I'll make up a number here, $20,000. Right, yep, that's about right. And some of that has to go to paying nurses and all that. Okay, yep, so you're still doing okay. How much does it cost for another one of those sterilizing cabinets? Oh, I don't know, probably a couple of $1,000. So an hour or two's work. Oh yeah. Why haven't you bought another one? He said, oh, that would get rid of delays. It would pay for itself within a day. Okay, I just order another one. How much does it cost to hire a nurse? Oh, that's a bit more each week. It's probably this, and this. Okay, right. How long would it take to pay for that each week for an extra nurse? Probably 2 operations. Okay, right. So why haven't you got another nurse? Oh, I'll get another nurse. Okay, so hope you're seeing here. There's some. I'm not saying there's a status thing, or that there clearly is. There is a status thing, but I'm not saying that we're not all equal as human beings, etc., etc. It's just that some people earn the money, and the other people and are much more scarce, and other people support those people. So the nurses support, and the sterilizing machine and the PA, they support the surgeon. Okay, so just take that in mind. It's not saying anyone's better, although I know a few surgeons and I'm sure they would say that they are, but that's beside the point. Okay, so some resources are more strategic, and they should be the bottleneck, and other people, if you want to get throughput through and productivity as a team, should have enough capacity to keep them flowing smoothly, not delayed. Right, now let's move to software development. And there should be a little picture coming up here on the screen. Look at that. I do that. That's as good as it gets. You just got customer, you got people upstream of developers, BAs, subject matter experts, UX people, all sorts of people upstream. They work on stuff, they prepare stuff, and it kind of pops into a fuel tank, just in my analogy that you'll read in the book. And then the developer and the tester will work on that. They'll probably to and fro with the people up front and stuff. And then once they're done, they'll go whew, and it will be ready to go out the door. So nothing unusual there, just very generic and totally wrong, but good enough view of a development team. So the question is, which resource is most strategic? And I reckon there are 2. So I reckon the developers, like the surgeon, they're the ones that cut the code, right? They don't cut the patient, they cut the code. They're the ones that make the stuff and deliver it. And the customers are also strategic because they tell us what direction to go in. So hopefully if I push the button here, the next thing. So which resource should be the bottleneck? Well, I tell you, it must almost always be the developers, because they're analogous to the surgeon, and they must really almost, if you want to be using the most optimal value, they must not be the customer. Because if the customer, it's like that funnel, the bottleneck is at the front of the system, you have everything after it, in theory, not being able to work because they haven't got any work coming in from the customer because the capacity isn't enough. But what happens in the real world is that, and we talked about this utilization syndrome, the thing that kills things, where we need to keep people busy and utilized all the time. What happens when the bottleneck is upstream of the developers is that the developers have more capacity and they keep working. They keep working, even if the quality stuff is coming in. And then the managers go and they talk to the customers and they say, hey, look, we need more stuff from you. And they say, you're slowing down our teams. There's one of you, there's 50 of them, you're slowing them down. We need more time. So under pressure, not to slow down 50 developers, the customers go, oh, interesting. And they rifle through their things and they go, this one here, it's not the top of my list. In fact, it's number 20 on my backlog, but it's also 5 months worth of work. And if I gave that to developers, that would keep them busy. So what we get when the bottleneck's right at the front is that we still keep our developers busy and our whole development team, but they're working on low value stuff. Move just in a little bit further and you still upstream of the developers. If those guys there don't have spare capacity, then they're also under pressure to feed the hungry developers, and they can either lower quality or they can lower the value of stuff they're putting in. Or here's the classic, they're in a hurry, so they give a solution that's good enough, but if they'd had another day or two to think about things, then they would have passed something that was smaller and better and neater to the developers, right? So if the bottleneck is upstream, people cut corners just to keep the developers busy. It's exactly the same if it's the testers. So one of the fundamental things about Agile, the most fundamental thing just about, is that we want fast feedback from testers. And that's one of the ways that we get, we keep our WIP low. Our developers, they write something, they test it themselves, they give it to the testers, sitting there waiting, and they turn around and they go, yep, that works, or no, it doesn't. Okay, so that's how it works if it's efficient. If the testers are the bottleneck, the developers work on something, they say, oh, here you go, and the tester says, I'll get to it on Tuesday next week. I'm too busy, but I'll get back to it, I promise. So the developer doesn't sit and wait, because developers can't be not busy. So they start something else. And then the cycle repeats and you end up with a whole lot of half-done stuff. So what you want is you want the developers to be the bottleneck, which means everyone else has enough capacity to do their job properly without cutting corners. So that means that upstream, the people that are feeding work into the developers, they have time to make sure that stuff and prepare stuff. That's not true, but that they have. It's a different. That ones up front need time to get the solutions right before they get them to developers. The testers need time to make sure that they are reactive, and so that the delays that go between, so that the developer and the testers effectively run as one unit. Right. So what you normally find, so I call this a U-shaped team. It's not strictly a U-shape. It just kind of looks U-shaped here the way I've drawn it out. But the rule is that the developer should be the bottleneck. Graph out, calculate the capacity. You want the people upstream and downstream of it to have enough capacity to not be the bottleneck. Because if they are the bottleneck, what you'll find is that people will cut corners in order to keep the developers busy. That's the problem. If a tester normally has time to do extra testing, that's not really a problem. If an analyst has time to wander off and explore all sorts of things, that's not a problem. If a customer has plenty of time to do their day job as well as support the team and stuff, that's not a problem. But developers needing to keep them busy, what it does is it keeps them busy in the first instance by they just work on low quality stuff, and it keeps them even busier because they end up doing rework. Right, now I'm just going to wrap up there. So this manager that I met says, oh, great, that's really interesting. That makes perfect sense. In fact, I've got a team that's structured exactly like that right now. Think of them. Brilliant. I'm very clever. Hey. And I go, well, that's excellent. Good work. And then he says, oh, but I've just advertised positions for 3 more developer team. And before he knew this, that's what he was going to do. He was going to get more developers, because it happens all the time. It's just the pattern. We need more software done. Get more developers. Okay, so that's kind of, I'm trying to think. Yeah, that's kind of that. But I just want to this happens over and over again, and there's one tactic that's kind of a bit awkward with this that I've noticed is that when you start managing this, you often need less developers. You often realize that you can't quickly stack up the capacity around them. You can do that surprisingly quickly, but you can't you can't actually just do it quickly. So sometimes you realize my team has just got too many developers in it, and I can't make sure that so you're not getting rid of them. In the whiteboard example I showed you, I said they didn't get 6 extra developers. They also, after a few months, they actually released 3 developers back to project teams because they realized that they just didn't need them. The project I mentioned with 100 people, they ended up, when they realized what was going on in the early stages, I moved it to the point where I helped them figure out how to move it just by doing good Agile initially, so that the bottleneck was the developers, and that took probably 4 months of just making improvements. But then they looked and they go, hey, we've got too many developers. So they didn't renew a lot of the contracts because they just realized that they had too many there. And I feel bad as an ex-developer that this could be seen as a cost-cutting thing, but the value that comes out by having fewer people is actually it's enormous. So I'm just going to wrap up on this. So I drew this thing out here, right? So notice at the top, it says influence and helpfulness. So that's the scale I'm trying to measure there. I don't know if you noticed that to start with. If you wanted to, and you were a CEO or somewhere, you could put dollar signs up there, because what we're doing here is you're just shipping more. You've done the limited WIP stuff, which is awesome. We've got Agile going. We've got Scrum. We've got Kanban. There's just so much waste gone. Add in a little bit of bottleneck management, and suddenly you're shipping even more. Manage it with the U-shaped team, and your productivity it just skyrockets. Partly because there's so much hidden rework just disappears that's currently been caused by the bottleneck not being in the right place, or because you get a customer engaged properly, and the value that they work on is just enormous. So you could put dollar signs there, but for people like us who go to these kind of geeks like us, let's be honest, geeks like us, I think most of us, our careers go from like being technical, and then we stumble across all this fascinating stuff for Agile, Kanban, Lean, theory constraints. Occasionally, even there's some interesting stuff in Six Sigma, and we pick up this stuff. And what I'm suggesting here is that go read that, or if you prefer, sorry, that one, I'm going to look at the right thing. Go read that, and then you will increase your influence, partly because you'll be seen as a person that can just suddenly solve problems. But my first experience with this is I solved a multi-million-pound problem with a company that was caused by some accountants, one accountant. And I know nothing about accounting, but so it increases your influence because you can solve bigger problems because you have a recipe for effectively de-siloing organizations. So, and there's just one last little bit about theory constraints. The bottleneck stuff is only just the beginning. There's so much more for it. So I would love it if you want to just LinkedIn, if you haven't already, or email me if you prefer, tweet me, track me down and knock on my door, and just get a copy of these. Just read that, and you'll then have what's called the curse of bottlenecks, because you will see the bastards everywhere, and you'll never ever again enjoy having a cup of coffee, because you'll stand there looking, going, "Oh, don't they see? Can't they see?" But overall, it'll make you a better coach, manager, whatever. and it just calms things. You know, it makes you feel clever because you know stuff other people don't. Anyway, that's me. Thank you.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Here I am. Thanks, Clarke. Awesome to have you here. And there was a last comment from Jaren. I've seen a badly screwed V-shape with very heavy project demand, cramming the few divs to the point that there was a dependency blocker stopping them getting traction. Keep the divs busy, create incomplete stories.
Yep.
Yeah.
The hard thing about the U-shape is it's actually quite tricky to get it there. It's trickier to keep it there protected. So that's the bit that I realize I've done a lot of clever stuff logistically, and then when I was younger, quite a few of them sort of crumbled away, and that's why it's easier to do the poor performing stuff. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
Yeah.
You do the talking.
I mean, the thing is, from my point of view, is in Kanban we talk about systems, and no system is ever the same. So all teams are different, all organizations are different. The dependencies between systems, services, teams are different. So, and that's why I love the theory of constraints and also Kanban, because it's so flexible, really. And it looks at what there really is instead of just putting a framework on top of you. So, and if you're interested, Clarke talked about this, the thing, you need to measure things in order to improve things. And the measurements might actually also be different depending on what organization and teams you work in and what you want to measure. If you're interested, there is a meetup from Sonia Sidorova next week, who is the founder of Nave, an online tool to actually create really awesome metrics. Might be another add-on to your work and might be helpful. But that just came to my mind because Clarke talked about it before and how important it is to actually measure things to improve things.
Yep.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Clarke, and thanks everybody for joining. It was a pleasure having you all. Sorry that it took a little bit longer, but I think it was worthwhile. Yeah, and I hate to have the end of a meetup because I feel like I'm throwing everybody out there.
Well, now you have to find the end meeting for all button, and we're going to all sit and watch you as you.
Yeah. Cool. So, hang on. I just try to. What a great meetup! Thank you, Clarke. Because if I
Someone very nicely said it was more interesting than Netflix. That's quite a compliment. Thank you.
Her 8-year-old daughter loved them. That's good.
What's your daughter's name, Graz?
She's called Anya.
Anya.
And it was such an unprompted compliment because she was sitting saying, I like it. So well done.
They're so funny.
That was very interesting. Thank you both. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Hope it helps.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Clarke, did you want to stay in for a minute, or should we? Yeah, cool.
Yep, I'll stay for a moment.
Yeah. Bye, everybody. Enjoy your evening.
Thanks again. See you later.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye.
very
Thanks
much.
a lot. Really good. Thanks, Ilka.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ilka, and thanks, Clarke. Awesome again, mate.
Cheers,
Thanks,
Greg. Right, and I'll get rid of my backup.
The backup. Can I? I just remove them.
Yeah, sometimes if people have just wandered away and they're waiting for the recording.
Yeah, no.
There
Oh,
we go.
that's a good point.